You want to see something sketchy? Don't try this at home. How come we always say that before we hurt ourselves? Don't tell my wife I did that. I got busted. Deb saw the video and she said I'm not allowed to do any more hinky stuff and fall down and hurt myself and go to the hospital again. So she says I have to build a set of steps to go up to the mezzanine now instead of climbing all over everything and doing all that sketchy stuff. So I said, okay. So the first thing I did is got myself some 10-foot 1x6 type material and put it up in place where I kind of wanted it to go, and eyeballed it up and got a good angle. I took my level up on the wall and drew a line on the board exactly where it was going to go. And I also measured that line. So the length of that line would determine how much I needed to take off the bottom. So I set up some material on the floor and clamped it all in place and drew a line on there and was ready to cut it up to the 2 marks that I just made. So I got out my handy dandy digital angle finder and found the exact angle from the lines that I drew on the board. 34.9, well, we'll round it up to 35 degrees and call her a day. Those little angle finders, they're a good little tool. Now, seeing as my shop is set up to cut 8-foot pieces of material, because all the blades are all in the middle of the shop everywhere, and I can cut 8 foot here and 8 foot there, I can't cut 10 foot everywhere, unfortunately. So I had to get out my handy dandy handsaw. I waxed up my handsaw and I attached a piece of scrap plywood for a guide and started cutting away. After I cut the board to what I thought would fit, I put it in place there and it fit. First cut, first time. How about that? What do you know? So with the one board cut, it was an easy enough deal just to lay one board on top of the other board and cut the pieces right from that using the template so they're both identical. With the 2 beams ready to be incorporated into the ladder, I can figure out what my rise and run of the treads should be. So why recreate the wheel? I just went over to a ladder that I've been climbing up and down all over stuff for years now and measured that, the width and the height of each of the steps. I had another dilemma with a shop design for 8 foot. I had to cut all the 10-foot boards in half on the miter saw before I could actually start cutting down in pieces. With my exact angle of 34.9, or 35 degrees, set up on the miter saw, and I determined it was correct. I could go about figuring out how many that I needed to do. So I did some quick math here and I needed 13 per side times 2 is 26. I needed 26 of the inserts to go on the inside of the ladder rails. With all the ladder beam supports all cut up now, all 26 of them, I could turn my attention to actually making the treads. I only needed 13 of those, so I had to readjust the miter saw back to 0 degrees. And it was really simple. I just set up 15 inches on my handy little stop gauge on miter gauge bench. All the bits and pieces are all cut now, and it's time to turn attention to assembling it all together. I was very careful to mark and lay out the 2 ladder beams. So the assembly process was pretty easy and pretty smooth. All I did was insert some glue between the beams, the solid beams, and the beam inserts, and I used the actual treads as a spacer so I'd make sure that they'd end up nice and tight. I used brad nails to secure them in place while the glue was drying, and also to add a little bit of reinforcement to keep those beam support pieces in place. That installation process went pretty quick, simple, and easy. I did clamp it down to the bench and clamp them together overnight just to let the glue dry. So the next day, my supervisor and I set about setting in the stair treads in between the two beams of the ladder. It was a pretty simple process. Glued them all in, pounded them into place. Used a countersunk bit to drill some holes so the wood wouldn't split, and put some 1.5-inch screws in there. This was working out so well, I was feeling like a champion. So with Queen songs in mind, I was pounding them into place one after the other. I got smart after a while and started turning the ladder on the side so that it was much easier to drill the pilot holes and drive in all the 1.5-inch screws. Not only that, it was kind of fun playing with different camera angles. Near the end there, with the Queen musicosis still going on in my brain and my hand getting kind of sore, I decided to smarten up and pick up the mallet and start driving the treads home. So the next bit was a little tricky, took a little bit of figuring out there. I set the ladder up in place and marked on the wall where the ladder would end up. And I couldn't just screw that into the hinges that I had, so I screwed the hinges into a 2x6 block and then attached the rest of the hinge 2x6 block assembly up to the wall. That way I could then put the ladder in place and screw the ladder to the 2x6 wall. It all worked out. It was a little complicated, but that's okay. Okay, this should be my last sketchy climb on toolboxes and furniture. I had to attach the ladder to the 2x6 block, so I threw a couple of screws in it, and with Danger being my middle name, I climbed on it to add in the rest of the screws. I'm sure glad that didn't break. I could not explain that to Deborah. Kind of felt like that guy sitting on the tree limb cutting off the branches. You were sitting on the limb. Oh well, it all worked out, and it seems to work just fine. So I hooked up a bit of a pulley rope system to it and climbed up and down a couple of times. It seemed to work really well. I actually can't believe how sturdy that little ladder system is. It worked really, really well.